Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And please do check out the Just Energy Radio website. That's www.justenergyradio.com, where you can find over 5 years' worth of show archives with a number of shows that Eldon has been on, who's our guest this hour, so you can listen to all of his great information. Also, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter that'll keep you informed of all the great programming we have coming up. So let me tell you a little bit about Eldon Taylor, our next guest, and we will get him on the air. Eldon Taylor is the host of the popular radio show Provocative Enlightenment. He is an award-winning New York Times best-selling author of over 300 books and audio and video programs. He is the inventor of the patented InnerTalk technology and the founder and president of Progressive Awareness Research, Inc., who has been featured as an expert in film, print, television, and radio. He has been called a master of the mind and has appeared as an expert witness both hypnosis and subliminal communication. Eldon's latest book is I Believe, When What You Believe Matters. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, the author of the new book, I Believe, What You Believe Matters, Eldon Taylor. Hi, Eldon. How are you?
Well, I am wonderful on this Easter weekend, and thank you very, very much for the opportunity to join you and to share with your delightful audience, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, and it's always great to have you on. I get excited when I find out you have a new book coming out. It's like, ooh, I get Eldon.
Yeah, I love that. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I just feel like, you're just always so filled with information, and I feel like we have a good time. And, you're not shy in just sharing what you know with the listeners, and I just really appreciate that.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, that's why we do what we do, isn't it? I had if I may, I happened to be a guest on a radio show not long ago, and there was a caller that called in, and the caller said, I listened to the story that you were telling about yourself, and as you were telling that, I had my own epiphany, my own uncovering. I so related to it, and I feel so liberated as a result of it. Now, the story I was telling was a rather, a personal story and somewhat embarrassing, except that we often, in our sharing, can indeed help others, just as this caller. And the radio host said to me, this was a drive-time radio host, not somebody that generally works a lot in self-improvement. The radio host said to me, does that happen often? And, my answer to that, and I know it's your answer too, is the reason we do, the reason we share, the reason you and I are having this exchange right now is for precisely that purpose. And it does happen quite a bit, and we we actually feed on it, or at least I feed on it. I don't want to put words into your mouth. It gives me my warm, fuzzy feeling that makes me realize that perhaps in some way your life makes a difference. It helps someone.
I totally agree. I mean, I feel like, when I'm talking to guests about coming on the show, I said, we like to talk about meat. I like to get into a conversation and have the listener leave feeling like they've learned something, gotten a little piece of insight, got more understanding about themselves or the world around them. I don't want to talk about your webpage. I want to talk about things that are important or things that are going to help people along their paths on this planet.
Right, and I so totally agree with you. We have such a small amount of time to share so much information that if you spend a lot of time on the other, then you don't get the information. You're just a commercial. And, we got lots of that. In fact, because it's something that I do, as you know, paying attention to how we all just get inundated. I mean, brainwashed with the propaganda nowadays. I happen to be checking some numbers earlier today, and do you know that it's estimated, the conservative estimate of how much money television advertising. How much television advertising will go on just for the 2012 election? It's estimated.
No guess.
Estimated it'll top $3 billion, Rita.
$3
billion. Wow. Just think about all the sound bites everybody's going to have in their heads that they're going to be thinking with. I just go, wow.
I mean, my husband and I have become big, we love, and I'm going to say our TiVo, our little DVR thing. Neither of us can make it through watching any kind of shows. We're big on, like, History Channel and those kind of shows. But we can't take the 10 minutes of commercial after 5 seconds of show. And so we will literally record everything and watch it after just to not listen to the commercials.
That's really smart. My family and I do something similar. When we do watch entertainment television, we do it vis-a-vis Netflix, which is, of course, commercial-free. You can get the TV shows that way. But, I mean, most people don't realize that television plays such a significant role in every aspect of their life. From the kinds of idle thoughts that you have, the ideation process, all that nonsense, like go ahead and make my day. I don't get even, I get evener. To the images, how we dress, and the products we consume, and what our ambitions are, and so on and so forth. But according to the A.C. Nelson information, their reviews, the average American now watches 3 3/4 hours of television a day, which amounts to 52 days of nonstop TV during a year. So that by the time you're the age of 65, the average American will have spent nearly 9 years glued to the tube. Now, when you realize that you sit down in front of that television, in under 3 minutes, you're going to go into alpha, that brainwave, that slowed brainwave state that we associate with hypnosis. Indeed, as you said in the setup piece, I have testified as a witness, expert witness about hypnosis, and hypnosis is just a state of hypersuggestibility, accompanied by this objective brainwave pattern, this alpha, theta pattern, and that slowed down pattern that you get when you sit in front of television. So here you are, you're in front of television, and here comes a commercial, and you're in this hypersuggestible state. Well, what do you think's going to happen? Of course you're going to pull. If it says the Gombu's coming to town and you're going to get it, well, you may as well go to your hypnotist, pay him $125, $150, say, hypnotize me, tell him I'm going to get sick, so that when I do, I can come back here and give you another $150 and you can fix me. Because that's what goes on. It's insane.
But you know what, Eldon? I don't think they work on me because I don't buy really any of the stuff. Lucky Charms are not magically delicious to me.
That's good. But you've already indicated that you don't watch it. But then the second thing is you're alert. You're aware. A mindful person begins to realize who they are by examining their thoughts, their feelings, with regard to everything. And, the reason I wrote the book, I believe, when what you believe matters, is the bottom line, what you believe always matters. And your belief system is like an elaborate web. You can get into the center of all webs, and such beautiful geometry, and they're so tightly, beautifully done, everything knitted together. And then as you move out to the edges, that geometry kind of breaks down, but it fixes itself very rigidly. And here's the important part. You touch any part of that web, way out on the edge or somewhere in the middle, the entire web vibrates. We have life beliefs. And our life beliefs are like that web. And we might think, I have a belief. I think money is the source of all evil. It's Easter weekend, and didn't they say that it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than it is for the laden camel to pass through the eye of the needle? So I have this belief, but that only affects how much money I make. Well, you're wrong. It affects everything in your life. It affects the choices that you make. It affects how successful you are in your job. It affects everything, including your family, your children, the schools they might go to, etc. Every single belief we have is a part of that web. There's no such thing as an inconsequential belief. And because most of them are taken out of our process of enculturation, from our peers, that organic system that we get as children, where peers and parents and teachers and those in authority tell us we're not old enough, or we're not wise enough, or we're stupid, or we'll never amount to anything, or we're criticized because we smile in a way that somebody says is funny, and so the rest of our life we don't smile. Or we're told that we're too skinny, or we're too fat, and we develop all these strategies, compensation mechanisms to avoid being rejected, to avoid feeling hurt. And in that process, we build a self that isn't authentic. It's not who we are. It's a condition of alienation. The brilliant psychiatrist Robert Lang said the condition of alienation, of being asleep, of being unconscious, of being out of one's mind, is the condition of the normal man. He said we're not able to even think adequately about the behavior that is at the annihilating edge. But what we think is less than what we know. What we know is less than what we love. What we love is so much less than what there is. And to that precise extent, we are so much less than what we are.
Yeah.
So
let me ask a question. One of the things that I often think about, even though most people look at me very cockeyed, is the nature of our accepted, and I'm going to say belief system as humanity. There is a level of culture, like the Ten Commandments, the basic principles that are in the Ten Commandments, and I'm just using that very broadly as an example, pervade society. Whether you're in the United States or whether you're in a tribe in the Congo, they pervade society. And the question I always ask myself is, well, who made them up? And what would happen if those basic beliefs were changed, or, how did they come into being? Did that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And I think that's a brilliant question, by the way, because, if we play philosophers a bit, just you and I, Rita, and we have our roundtable conversation, when you say the Ten Commandments, I'm sure what you mean by that is we have rigid rules throughout the world. They're not all the same. They're not at all like the Ten Commandments. Obviously, the law of Sharia is somewhat different than that. But we do have these moral value systems. Now, epistemologically, we really can't say for certain that any of them are absolutely right. What we have to do, I think, though, as a society is re-examine the purpose of these value systems. It's easy to look into history and say values are developed in order to bond cultures together, to create the ability for a society to build, for people to cohabitate, to do so in some level of security. So obviously we create rules, we create laws that you don't kill your neighbor and you don't steal his property and so on and so forth. So you can see a productivity model that grows out of values. But if we look further back as philosophers and we look at Plato and we look at his discussion on virtues, we have to really say, is there such a thing as a virtue? Is there a archetypal form of virtue, something that we can cling together? Because if, as a society at large throughout this world, we can't come to a generally accepted, this is the value system, well, then we're never going to have peace in the world. We're going to be forever, preying on one another. one of the things implicit in your question, if we continue to spread out the tentacles of our philosophy, is what happens if we don't have those values? And we're seeing a breakdown in cultural values today. They call it the cultural war, for that matter. We're seeing the promotion of cultural relativity. In other words, we're seeing a lot of, well, it's okay because that's what their society believes, or the majority think this should be okay, and so it should be okay. Or, well, it's none of my business. They're not doing anything to me, so why should I be interested in what they do in their private lives? We're finding all kinds of ways to justify actions so long as those actions don't impede upon my own liberty. And that we think of as cultural relativity. It wasn't long ago on my own radio show I had a prominent writer, Neil Donald Walsh, on the show. Those people know who he is, Conversations with God, and he happened to tell me that he believed that values, there was no such thing as virtue, an absolute virtue or values. And I brought to his attention, some of what goes on in places like Pakistan. And his point was, you can't blame those people for what they do. That's how they're raised. Now, it just happened that we were talking about a 14-year-old girl who'd had her ears and her nose cut off by her husband because he was disappointed by her. She was cast out to the barn. Maybe you know this story. And ultimately, she ended up coming to the United States. Women for Women rescued her, brought her to the United States. Physicians rebuilt her face. But this was a story that was all over. Barbara Walters had her on television, etc. And this is a story I put in front of him. And so Neil said, whatever 50% of the people plus one decide the rules should be, that's what the rules are. And you can't judge them for that behavior. That is the way it is. Now, you see, my problem with that, Rita, again, staying philosophical for a moment, is look at the atrocities in history that are justified by 50 plus 1. I mean, in front of all of us, the first thing that everybody thinks about is Adolf Hitler. But
he was on my paper.
and you can go to all kinds of places recently, like Rwanda, and say, this is where the majority of people have decided that this action is okay, and we as the world can look at that action and say it absolutely is not okay.
All right, well, let me interject a little contrary here, but
please.
If they are being their authentic self, and even though this might make you cringe, and they are following their inner guidance to do these atrocities, how do you judge it? How do you know, and this is even getting a little even further out there, how do you know they're not being directed, sick as this may sound, by spirit to do these things?
First of all, I don't judge. I don't think that I have the prerogative to judge someone because I don't live their life, I don't know their life, etc. So when you say judge, I'll set that aside and say discern. I believe that all of us are required to make discernments in life. We are active agents. We are here to learn, and this is a universe of opposites, good and bad, light and dark. Those people that say life was never meant to be a struggle have got their head stuck somewhere where it just doesn't simply work. Because if we don't struggle, if we don't deal with the growing, with the hardships, then we don't really mature. In fact, there's a wonderful story that I tell having to do with this, and I believe about the Emperor Moth, and I'll just share that for a minute because it's so relevant here. Bad things do happen to very good people, but the story goes like this. We have a scientist that just falls in love with this beautiful Emperor Moth. I mean, they are a gorgeous species. And he decides he's going to dedicate his time and he's going to study him. And so he happens to, in watching, see one form a cocoon, and he carefully removes the branch that it's on, takes it back to the laboratory, and then he begins to take notes and how many days and watches it, and the day finally comes that moth begins to chew its way out of the cocoon. Well, begins early in the morning. He's all excited. He stands near. He's watching. He's taking his notes, and it struggles and it chews a little bit. Tries to get, falls back in. Tries to get out, falls back in. Just doesn't seem to be able to get out. And its large eyes poking out, looking at him, and he anthropomorphizes it some, and he thinks, there it is. It's looking at me. Like I'm a god saying, how come you don't help me? And my goodness, I guess I should. So he gets his tweezers and he opens the cocoon. The moth comes out, falls on the table, and quickly dies. Turns out as he studies these moths over the next few years that it is the struggle that pushes the fluids back into the moth, that strengthens the body, that aerodynamically shapes it, that is indeed what gives it its beauty and its life. So life, in a very real sense, can analogically be looked at that we're going to struggle, and the struggles that we go through in our life are going to make us stronger. We're going to learn from those. So our process here isn't one of, we know everything, and indeed I like to think of it this way. Imagine that on the other side, before you come into this life, because you mentioned spirits, so let's just pursue that. Mm-hmm. Imagine on the other side that you're looking at this world, and you know everything that there is to know. Well, analogously, that might be that, let's just take, today I could take my computer, and utilizing a mathematics program, I could devise all the information necessary to be a great pole vaulter. How fast I'd have to run, at what angle the pole would have to be set down, what angle my arms would have to be at, the trajectory, at what point I kick straight out, etc. I could have this all mapped out. I could actually run an animation of it on my computer, and so I would know perfectly how to be a pole vaulter. But that would not make me a pole vaulter. I would have to pole vault to be a pole vaulter. Well, we may know lots of things before we come in here, but until we do those things, we don't know what they are. So I believe we're here to discriminate. That's a part of what life is. Now, if I'm walking through the park and I see somebody being mugged, some older woman maybe being, taken down, or older man by a couple of teenagers, I've got some choices. I can go on and I can say, oh, well, that's supposed to be, that's one of those new agey things. Everything that happens for a reason. That's, I guess, is karma, None of my business. I can do something. I can be an intervention. And at the same time I'm being an intervention, I can also say, well, this is what's supposed to be because this is true to my nature. I can't walk by and leave this one. And the universe knows that. So maybe as an intervention I've called law enforcement, maybe I've gone over and got myself involved in it, but I can't walk by. I think each and every one of us have to look at ourselves and realize that what is character? What is your character? Your character is not, the role you play. I right now I've got a suit and a tie on, and I've got an activity today that will have me speaking in a number of different circumstances. But I'll tell you, I have a little ranch in Spokane, Washington, and if tomorrow I put my cowboy boots and my chap and my hats on and I head out to the barn, I have to watch myself or my personality changes. Everyone I know is a chameleon like that. They change their clothes and their personality changes. I know a radio talk show host that's a psychologist and has a Harley. And with her chaps on that Harley, she is not at all the psychologist or the radio talk show host that you would know in these other personalities. Well, what is it about us that has us changing like a chameleon? You see, if I'm going to wear character, not the character that is the role I act out, but character of who my being is, I have to ask myself, what is there in this world that is right? What is there in this world that is more important than me? Because if there's nothing in this world that's more important than me, then I may as well be a hedonist, and maybe, like Freud, I'll subscribe to some of his ideas, because it was Freud that said this: religion interferes with this play of selection and adaptation by forcing on everyone indiscriminately its own path to the attainment of happiness and protection from suffering. Its technique consists in reducing the value of life and distorting the picture of the real world by means of delusion. And this presupposes the intimidation of the intelligence at this price by forcibly fixing human beings in a state of psychical infantilism and drawing them into a mass delusion. Religion succeeds in saving many of them from individual neurosis. Now, if you think about that for a minute,
do you have that
if
memorized?
I have no character, no value system, if I have sold out to this cultural relativity, well then, what am I gaining out of it? I guess I may be saving myself from some neurosis because I don't want to deal with the real world. I mean, those folks that are being starved, those folks that are being killed, those folks that, I mean, that's none of my business. I mean, after all, it's okay in their culture.
But even in our own culture, it's like, there's the in-group, and then there are the people that fall outside, I like to say the box. And a lot of the people that see themselves as being outside the in-group, struggle because they feel like there's something wrong with them, that they're flawed in some way, that they don't meet up to this bar that somebody somewhere constructed, the beautiful people.
Right.
and they're challenged, and I think many times they don't even realize that the beautiful people aren't necessarily all that beautiful. They just think they are.
But see, therein, Rita, again comes the purpose, the value of character. I mean, the book, I believe, is all about this. When I was a boy, straight to your point, I can remember looking out into the world and saying, this doesn't make any sense at all, this notion that God created everyone equal. Are you kidding? I mean, there are children that are born in Africa. They don't go 90 days down the road. They starve to death. And there are deformities, birth defects. And I mean, what do you mean equal? And I happen to be giving this sermon, if you will, to a minister. And he said to me when I was done, he said, let me ask you a couple questions, Eldon. He said, do you know who Walter von Braun is? And I said, of course. I mean, Walter von Braun was all over the cover of every magazine in this country. He is the German scientist that gave us liquid propulsion, and we had just launched the first of what today we think of as ICBMs. So he said, well, you imagine how von Braun felt after spending his entire life standing there watching that rocket race straight in the air just as he had planned. Can you imagine how he felt? Well, of course I can. I mean, think of the pride. Think of, the honor. Wow. I mean, yeah. And he said, okay, now I want you to think of just a custodian, This is just, not just a guy that works in a school, and all he does is scrub things. He's just a custodian. He runs a broom and a mop, all right? He's not a Walter von Braun, hasn't got a lot of degrees, doesn't launch any rockets, doesn't have his picture on the cover of Life magazine. But our custodian is asked to clean a room in the basement that hasn't been used for anything but storage for many years. And now this room is going to be the office of a young, new student teacher, someone that has paid him some respect and someone he likes. And so he wants to do a super job on it. He goes in early in the morning. He's moved everything out. He looks at it, and the floors are just horrible. I mean, they're black and white tile floor from back in the 40s, and, it's yellowed. And And so he gets his chemicals, and he gets his toothbrush and his toothpicks, and he scrubs every corner of this. His knuckles are raw. He's on his hands and knees. Some of the chemicals are, burning his eyes. When he finishes getting the floor cleaned, then he waxes it, and he waxes it with a tree wax, a paste wax by hand, circular rubbing over and over and over. It's late at night. He's been at it all day. It's maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night. He stands up at the doorway. He aches all over. He is finished. He looks at that floor, and it glistens. It shines like it never did when it was brand new. It is just shining like a mirror. How does he feel? And
Very proud.
The fact is, just as the same feeling Walter von Braun had, Rita. Mm-hmm. Therein is character. Character comes from taking my very best to everything that I do with integrity. There's another story I tell in the book about John Huntsman.
Come back to that story, but I just want to make a commentary. I feel like in today's society, that mindset, that doing the best you can with everything that you have is almost a thing of the past. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's almost, it's like, well, I showed up, and that's supposed to be good enough.
I know, and if you want to do politics, you have to realize that part of that is being brought on by what we think of as an entitlement, an attitude of entitlement. There is a real cultural decision to be made by the people in our society, members of our society today. There is the old Emerson self-reliance treatise, that do my very best, the independent, work real hard, and that's contrasted today with an idea that things ought to be easier, things ought to be given me. I don't want to say a form of socialism, but it does seem to move that way. We do see that more and more people are asking for more and more and wanting to give less and less. And that is throughout our society, whether it is an individual that goes to work for a company who wants first to know, well, what are your benefits, and what are you going to pay me, and how much time do I get off, and how about things like maternity leave or sick pay, or do you have a pension plan? In other words, instead of, when I was a boy, and I tell this story also in I Believe, but when I was a boy, and I'm dating myself here, things were really tough. It was really hard to get a job, and there was a fellow that I knew that was very successful, and he lived nearby, and he'd said to me when I was young and did things for, like mow lawns and that, he said, if you ever need anything, come see me. So I went over and I saw him. His name was Prince, and he owned a cinder block company. And they put up cinder block walls and did other things with cinder blocks. And I asked him, I want to get a job, and how do you go out? How do you get a job? I mean, what would I be doing? I mean, and so he gave me basically this set of instructions. He said, Eldon, whenever you go into an employer, what you want to do is impress that employer that you want to work for him. Not that you're looking for a job, because understand there's a difference. Everybody's looking for a job. Everybody out there says, hey, can I have a job? Can I have a job? Instead of, how can I work for you? How can I make more money for your business? So he says, when you go in to speak to an employer, speak to them with a passion. You want to work for them. You don't just want a job. If you go to the shoe store, tell them you want to learn the shoe business, and you really want to understand how it's done, and you understand that they have a good business, and you'll work very, very hard. Tell the employer what you'll give the employer. Well, I finished that conversation, and the next day I went out. It was on a Saturday, and I went looking for a job, and I applied at 3 places. The third place I applied gave me the job on the spot. The first place I did apply happened to be a shoe store, and I promise you that shoe store, that owner called me that evening and offered me the job. And when I told him I'd taken a job in a grocery store instead, he said, but I thought you wanted to learn a shoe business. You know, he was absolutely right. That's what I had told him. Now, maybe today I would probably dress that differently, but my point is this. When what we do with our lives is look at how we can contribute, how we can give, the take part of it is natural. You know, whether you're an attorney or you're a plumber or you're a radio talk show host, if you go to work every day with the idea of how you can provide a service, how you can give something, as you said at the beginning of the show, Rita, you don't talk about websites. What is it we can give the listener? How you can give from what it is that you do to the customer or the user, the client that you have on the other end, then the part of it that is your receiving, that happens automatically. Indeed, the more you give, the more you get back. I started to tell you a story about John Huntsman.
All right, but let me interrupt one more time.
Sure.
Just keep a little note there about that story. You know,
got you.
I'm feeling very argumentative with you today, Eldon, and I usually am
Okay.
not. But I think my, commentary opens up a very interesting area. It's like, but you use the word give, and it kind of bothers me because I don't know, and maybe it's just my beliefs around that word. Since we're talking about beliefs, it's where there's this kind of feeling to it about, well, when I give, I'm giving it away. And there's not really, and someone's not giving me anything back. I'm giving it. And I always like to frame with what you were talking about. If they're paying you, they should get 100% of your energy because that's what they're paying you for.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Maybe the equivocation is on the word give. What I mean by give is service. And I think of, I am convinced, absolutely convinced that my life purpose is about service. I think that is the purpose of everybody. But let's just put it this way. At the end of the day, the difference between knowing that my life made a difference and just same old, thank God it's Friday, is what I have been able to give to another human being. Because there is nothing that makes me feel better than when I've gone to the aid of another human being. Indeed, we now know through modern research techniques like fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, that the brain is wired to bathe us with all the great neurochemicals, the natural endorphins that make us feel good when we do go to the aid of another human being. It can be as simple as writing a check to a charity, and that will trigger the endorphins into the system. So we're not just, spiritually maybe, but we are hardwired from a pragmatic standpoint to find that giving, in the sense that I mean, the service, your very best at whatever you do to go to the aid of other individuals is when you get your highest best back. Not just in the so-called law of attraction, but in the sense of optimal well-being. So that said, now I'm not going to disagree with you about the quid pro quo kind of proposition. We live in a real world, and for all intent and purposes, it is necessary for us to pay bills, and so we have a right to expect payment for what we do. But as you said, if I'm going to take someone's money, if I'm going to agree to do something, if I'm going to choose to do it, as going through the park and coming on this stranger being attacked, whatever I am going to do, I am going to take my very best to it, period, or I'm going to let myself down.
And I totally agree with you, whether it's for, I think most people can wrap their mind around the money part. But, I'm sure because, you're self-employed like I'm self-employed, you know, I always joke around. It's like, well, you know, I make about a penny an hour sometimes, you know.
Right.
Where you have to do, I mean, it is work, but it's not about doing it halfway. You know, if you're going to do it, you have to do it.
That's
for
right.
real.
You have to walk your talk. You know, when you say that, Rita, years ago, you and I have had a bit of this conversation, so I'll just make it real short. But years ago, I ran a study at the Utah State Prison, and the notion in the study was how we could interrupt recidivity rates, how we could assist in rehabilitating inmates. And one of the things that we stumbled onto, or serendipity delivered to us, was this whole mechanism called blame. And in order to undo that, to get the inmates to take responsibility so they weren't going along with this, it's not my fault, the world did it to me, you know, my daddy was an alcoholic kind of stuff, they take responsibility for it so that they could then do something about it. Because, you know, to the extent that we defer responsibility to that precise extent, we also give away our power, our own franchise. We came on to this, what today I just call the forgiveness set. Now, this is in the early 80s, before any of the data that, I mean, you can find all kinds of journal articles today about forgiveness. So we utilized three primary messages in what we did, and they, in reframing the inmates' attitudes, they were, I forgive myself, I forgive all others, I am forgiven. And you know, it was like magic. It really worked. The pre and post data was so exciting that the prison installed voluntary libraries of this cognitive intervention tool, et cetera, and so forth. Well, in that process, you see, I was developing a patented technology, and this was the technology that we're studying, and today it's called InnerTalk. And so all of a sudden, I'm doing a lot of lecturing. I'm even writing books, and our number one selling program is Forgiving and Letting Go, because it's working with inmates, it's working with elite athletes, it's working with Fortune 500. It is like getting people unstuck. They're no longer blaming, and they're taking power in their life, and they're becoming active agents, and a whole long story that you and I have talked about before. Here's the bottom line, though. There came a point where in the middle of the night I woke up. I was impressed with, listen, if you really believe that this is the beginning point for everybody, you need to give it away. You need to make it available to everyone. You know, I went in the next day. I told my staff it's now free to anyone that asks for it. It is still free. They can download it today as an MP3 free, or they can get the CD by, just simply paying the shipping. And I had every member of my staff was like, you've got to be crazy. That is our best seller. You can't give that away. What are we going to do? What are we going to sell? Well, I'll tell you what. Since that time, and that's 15, 16 years ago, since that time my business has grown continually, consistently. I give more and more away every year. And what I find is that in doing that, more comes back to me. So I'm going to come back and suggest to you that when we do our very, very best, and our very best is to walk our talk, as you just said, Rita, then in that process, our eye is no longer on how much money I'm going to make. Our eye is on how much service I can do. And then the world seems to get better, one person at a time. And your worries about fortune and finances, they tend to themselves.
And I feel, you mentioned law of attraction, and I don't think law of attraction, is about saying affirmations. I feel like it's becoming part of the process fully. And when we fully engage, we are the attractor. We're engaging in the dynamics and the energy of the universe. And so if we're sending out and giving to the universe in whatever way that may be, it makes it the opportunity for it to come back to us.
Very well said. Very, very well said, Rita. That's the best I've heard it said, indeed.
Woo-hoo!
There's a chapter in the book on this law of attraction, and it is so
You can put it in your next book, Eldon.
No, there's a chapter, and I believe I will quote you. I will quote you. Count on that, because, so many people look at the law of attraction and they're going to do their vision boards and they're going to visualize and they're going to cut out, pictures from magazines and write affirmations and repeat them and set them on the refrigerator and the mirror where they dress in the morning and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that doesn't work. The fact of the matter is, it takes action for anything to work. So, but just imagine that you have, because there's a community not far from me where there is a very tuned-in group of people, and they're very, I don't really like this phraseology because I think it's a miasma of the group itself, but this new agey attitude towards, all I have to do is visualize it and use affirmations, and that makes me a magnet. But at any rate, imagine that we're going to have a foot race at the local school, and so we have 10 students that are going to compete, and they're all from these parents, and so they all do their affirmations, they all do their visualizations, they all make their vision boards, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Come race day, only one's going to win, and the likelihood is he's going to be the most gifted athlete. It has nothing to do with how well they visualized. The bottom line to that comes down to exactly what you said. In order for the law of attraction to work, you have to be sowing seeds. You have to be doing deeds. It doesn't come back to you simply because you're imagining sowing seeds. You're picturing yourself sowing seeds. I happened to be talking to a person the other day, and she said to me, I that's kind of like, imagine a telemarketing team, and they come to work, and instead of picking up the telephone, because she was involved in telemarketing, instead of picking up the telephone, they all sit in their chair and just visualize all of the sales they made. At the end of the day, yeah.
I would love it if they just sat in their chairs and visualized calling me up as opposed to calling me up.
Right, but you get the point. You can see that, as you said, it is what we do. It's as simple as what you sow is what you receive, and the law of attraction is at least that old. There's nothing new about the so-called secret.
Well, it's a secret because we didn't know about it, but
well, actually, we all did, I'm sure you did, because that material has been printed and reprinted, and for at least 200 years we have had printed books that talked about the law of attraction, and everything that you will find in The Secret, you will find in those books. But again, I think you can take it even further. You can go back to the Upanishads, you can go back to the Vedanic writings, you can go back to the Bahir, you can go back to the Bible. What you sow is what you reap, and that is the law of attraction. And that's what you said in a nutshell. What we take in and we're willing to give, and what we do, not just in our thoughts, in our actions and everything, that's what becomes the magnet that brings back to us of kind. I knew a young man who wanted to be a fighter, a boxer. He actually wanted to be a fighter, I guess now, cage fighting, and so he would always, in front of the mirror, he'd pretend that he was fighting, and he'd go to sleep imagining that he was fighting, and he'd walk that way around the school, and he happened to have a conversation with me, and the conversation was, everywhere I go, somebody wants to fight me, and I am so tired of it. It's just, it's like the older kids are always picking on me. Everybody wants to fight me, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm trying to mind my own business. Well, what he was doing wrong is really obvious, isn't it? And when he changed, and we had this conversation, when he changed, all those people that wanted to fight him, they just didn't want to fight him anymore. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting. Just a check. There's 7 minutes left to the show, so just want to give you a heads up there.
Well, that's cool. Then let me tell you the John Huntsman story.
Yeah,
you
okay.
got another question. Okay. See, and this to me is this is a classic example of examining our integrity. You know, years ago there was a song called "Skip the Rope." I don't know if you remember that or not, but essentially the song was, you know, isn't it kind of funny what the children say? You know, cheat on your taxes, practice the golden rule. Those were the kind of lyrics. A kind of dissonance that we have about things in our life. You know, it's okay to cheat here, but it's not here, and we tell our kids one thing and we do something else, and, you know, at any rate, here's the story of John Huntsman. Huntsman made a deal with a businessman to sell his business for $57 million, or a portion of his business, I should say, for $57 million. They shook hands on it. It took the attorneys about 6 months to get the paperwork together. And betwixt time, the stock for the companies that he was selling became worth over $100 million more. So the party that he's selling to essentially said, well, you know, hey, John, what we ought to probably do is, you know, let's split the difference. Let me give you the extra $50 million or so. And Huntsman, in his book, Winners Never Cheat, Even in Difficult Times, said, you know, I shook hands. I gave you my word. No, $57 million is the deal, because that was a good deal when I made the deal, and it's a good deal for you, obviously. You can see where it is now, and I don't go back on my word. Now, if you think about that for a minute, you think about being a parent. How many times maybe have we told our kids, you know, if you do this, I'll do that, or I'll tell you what, come this day, we'll all go do that, and then you change your mind and say, well, you know, on that day, and we don't keep our words with our children. Or how many times do we do that with ourselves? I'm going to tell you that integrity is a level of individual, personal understanding that essentially says, I am going to hold myself and my honor inviolate. Inviolate. I am not going to violate myself by breaking the honor to which I trust or I believe in myself, the honor to which I hold to be who I am. That's integrity. Now, in my view, all of my research for the past 30 years, Rita, has asked one question. Why isn't everyone successful? Why do people continue to do the same things and do them over and over and expect somehow that different outcome? Why don't they? What is it that stops one person from being successful when the person right next to him succeeds? Two brothers coming out of the same household. One becomes a criminal and the other becomes a physician in a teaching hospital. What is it that creates that? And I'm going to tell you, 30 years later, it comes down to it's always belief. It's always about what you believe. Every tiny little belief that you have impacts all the others, and those beliefs become your self-limiting, self-delimiting umbrella.
All right, Eldon, I think we will let it end on that note, but it's something for people to start thinking about, you know, what beliefs they have.
Well, and I love the opportunity to share with you, and I didn't think you were too contrary today, Rita.
Okay. I was being a little more contrary than I normally am, but
I
felt like it would bring up some really great points that needed to be explored. So it felt right.
Agree.
I wouldn't have done it if it didn't feel like the appropriate thing to do.
I agree, and I appreciated it. I enjoyed it, and I hope you did too.
Eldon, website, where your book is, all that good juicy information for the listeners?
Sure. Eldon Taylor, ELDONTAYLOR.com. There's a banner at the top of the page. If you click on it, it has a picture of the book, I believe. There's a couple of hundred gifts there that some really insightful people, I don't mean that, visionary people are participating in assisting us, promoting the book, and they have gifts for you, and those gifts range from prizes from people like James von Prague to people, like Dr. Norman Shealy. While you're there, remember those free programs that I mentioned. If you look at the right-hand navigation pane, just click on free programs, a number of MP3 programs you can download. And bless you. Have a wonderful Easter weekend. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today, Rita, and to share.
Thank you, Eldon, and you have an excellent Easter weekend as well, and we will talk to you next time.
Wonderful. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. That's Eldon Taylor, and please do go by his website if you want to get the book. There's lots of free gifts that come along with the purchase of the book. It has all the information of how you can, get the book, get the free gifts. So that's Eldon Taylor, his webpage, eldontaylor.com, his book, I Believe. And next week, let's see, who do we have next week? Next week we have Micah Hanks coming on, and we're going to be speaking about magic, mysticism, and the molecule. So until next week, have a great Easter weekend, and until then, be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita.